Aaron, a young human engineer, stood nervously on the shining deck of the Valari flagship. The great hall was filled with tall alien warriors, their armor polished like glass and their eyes sharp as blades. At the center of the hall stood Princess General Nira, leader of the fleet feared and respected across the stars. This was the moment Aaron had prepared for. He had been chosen as part of a cultural exchange between humanity and the Valari, a chance to prove that humans could stand beside mighty empires. His task was simple: greet the commander, offer respect, and blend quietly into his new post. Yet as he stepped forward, his heart raced and his tongue betrayed him. When he opened his mouth, the words came out wrong. Instead of the formal greeting, he accidentally spoke in the Valari tongue, calling her cute. The hall froze. Every officer turned toward him. The silence was so heavy that Aaron thought his lungs would stop working. Valari culture prized discipline and respect. No one, not even their highest generals, dared to speak to the Princess General in such casual terms. Nira's eyes locked onto him. She was tall, with a presence like a storm, her voice strong enough to command fleets and silent soldiers. Aaron expected anger, punishment, maybe even exile from the program. Yet Nira said nothing. She only stared at him, her gaze sharp, unblinking, and curious. The tension lingered until one of her officers coughed awkwardly. Nira lifted her hand, silencing everyone. She gave no order, no reaction, only continued to look at Aaron. He bowed quickly, apologizing in broken Valari speech, then retreated to the side of the hall. His face burned red, his mind filled with panic. Later, as the hall emptied and officers returned to their posts, Aaron noticed something strange. Whenever he glanced up, Nira's eyes were still on him. She did not glare with anger. She simply watched him, as if trying to read his thoughts. Aaron tried to focus on his work, setting up diagnostic systems on the ship's engines. The Valari technology was advanced, sleek, and alien, yet he found places where human methods might improve efficiency. Still, he could not escape the weight of her gaze. At meals, she sat at the head of the table and he felt her eyes on him. In the training halls, where soldiers drilled with perfect unity, she stood with arms folded, watching, always watching him. The other Valari began to whisper. To them, the Princess General's attention was no small matter. They wondered what interest she could have in a fragile human, someone far weaker and shorter than themselves. Some gave Aaron curious looks. Others avoided him altogether, fearing they might offend their leader by speaking too casually to him. Aaron wished he could disappear. His words had been a mistake, a simple nervous slip. Yet it seemed to have set something in motion. Nira did not scold him, did not punish him, and did not explain herself. She simply stared at him, and the more she did, the more uneasy he felt. One night, as Aaron walked through the quiet corridors of the flagship, he passed by the observation deck. Nira stood there alone, gazing out at the stars. Her reflection shimmered on the glass as distant suns burned in the void. She turned when she heard his steps, her golden eyes meeting his once more. Aaron froze. He considered apologizing again, but his words stuck in his throat. Before he could decide, Nira spoke for the first time since the accident. "You are unlike the others," she said calmly. "No Valari would dare speak to me as you did." Aaron stammered. It was a mistake. "I did not mean—" She raised her hand, silencing him as she had silenced the hall before. "Perhaps. But still, you said it. You spoke without fear." Her eyes lingered on him, sharp but not cruel. Aaron felt small under her gaze, yet also strangely seen, as though she was measuring something within him. Nira turned back to the stars, saying no more. Aaron stood quietly, unsure if he should leave or stay. In the end, he walked away, his mind filled with confusion. He had come to this fleet to work, to learn, to represent humanity. Yet somehow, with one careless word, he had caught the attention of the most powerful figure in the Valari Empire. And she would not stop staring at him. Aaron's first days aboard the Valari flagship had been a blur of nervous mistakes, endless work, and the constant presence of Princess General Nira's eyes. What had started as a slip of the tongue, a foolish greeting turned into an accidental compliment, had grown into something heavier. Wherever he went, she was there, and her gaze never left him. At first, Aaron thought he was imagining it. The flagship was massive, filled with thousands of soldiers, officers, and workers. Nira commanded every corner of it. Surely her eyes had better things to watch than a single human engineer fumbling through strange systems. But the more he tried to convince himself, the clearer it became. She stared during meals when the long tables were filled with disciplined Valari soldiers. They ate in silence, every movement precise, every action part of an unspoken code. Aaron, unused to such order, often fumbled with the utensils, drawing glances from those beside him. When he dared to lift his eyes, he would find her seated at the far end, still, quiet, and watching. She stared during training when soldiers moved in unison, their drills echoing through the wide halls. Aaron only observed, for he was no soldier, but Nira's gaze always found him. Her golden eyes followed him even when she was supposed to be inspecting the warriors. It was as if he was another drill to study, another weapon to evaluate. And she stared during meetings. Whenever the officers discussed strategies, disputes, or fleet movement, Aaron was sometimes called in to provide human insight into technical problems. He spoke softly, trying to explain in simple terms, and though most officers barely acknowledged him, Nira listened. Her stare was steady, unblinking, as though she weighed not just his words but also the man behind them. The whispers grew louder. Valari soldiers were proud and disciplined, but curiosity spread through them like quiet fire. What was so special about the human? Why did their princess general, feared and revered, waste her attention on him? Some grew envious, others uneasy. Few dared to approach Aaron directly, but he could feel the change. He was no longer invisible. Aaron did not enjoy the attention. He had come here to do his duty, to work on the great engines of the Valari fleet, to represent humanity with quiet respect. Instead, he had become a spectacle. Every move he made seemed heavier, as if the entire fleet expected something from him. Still, he did his work. The Valari systems were elegant but strict, designed for precision above all. Aaron discovered small inefficiencies that no Valari would notice, because their minds favored order over improvisation. He rerouted minor circuits, adjusted power flow, and suggested alternative pathways. At first the engineers resisted, but when his changes saved time and energy, even the most skeptical had to admit his methods were useful. It was after one such task that Nira spoke to him again. He had been working deep in the engine bay, sweat on his forehead, his hands blackened from handling unfamiliar parts. When he looked up, she stood there, taller than all, her armor gleaming even in the dim light. "You do not think like us," she said. Aaron froze, unsure how to respond. I only see where things can be different." Her gaze pierced him. "Different, yes, but effective. My officers would never alter what is already perfect. You do, you bend the rules." Aaron lowered his eyes. "Humans are not perfect. We survive by changing, by making things work even when they should not." For a long moment, Nira said nothing. Then she gave the faintest nod. "Perhaps that is why I find you interesting." The word sent a shiver through Aaron. He had not expected it, not from her. He bowed quickly, muttering thanks, but her eyes did not leave him. When she finally turned away, he was left with a pounding heart. From that day, her stares grew even more direct. No longer did she only watch from afar. Now during meals, she sat closer. During drills, she stood where he could not avoid her eyes. During meetings, she addressed him more often, asking for human insight in matters where none seemed needed. Aaron began to wonder if she was testing him, or if she simply enjoyed making him uncomfortable. But as days passed, another possibility crept into his thoughts. Maybe she truly wanted to understand. The Valari Empire was vast, powerful, and disciplined. They had conquered star systems and commanded fear wherever they went. Yet Nira, their greatest leader, stared not at her generals, not at her enemies, but at a single human, who had once embarrassed himself before her throne. Aaron did not understand why. The tension aboard the flagship grew thicker when news arrived of a rival faction moving in the outer regions. The Valari fleet would soon face battle, and every officer prepared for war. Soldiers trained harder. Engineers pushed the engines to greater limits, and officers gathered in endless meetings to predict the enemy's tactics. Aaron expected Nira to shift her attention to these matters. Yet she still watched him. In the war room, maps of stars and enemy fleets stretched across the glowing table, but her eyes often flickered back to him. In the training halls, she drilled her warriors with ruthless commands, but even as her voice thundered, she found time to glance his way. It unsettled him, but it also pushed him. If she was watching, then he could not fail. He threw himself into his work, solving problems others ignored, suggesting ideas others dismissed. When officers doubted him, Nira's steady gaze silenced them. Slowly, he began to feel less like an intruder and more like someone with a role to play. One night, unable to sleep, Aaron wandered again to the observation deck. The stars stretched endless before him, and the silence of space pressed against the glass. He thought himself alone until he felt the weight of a familiar gaze. Nira was there. She stepped forward, her armor whispering against the floor. "You are restless," she said. "Yes," Aaron admitted. "I do not belong here. Your people are strong, disciplined. I am only human. I make mistakes." She studied him carefully. "You spoke wrongly when you greeted me. Yet that mistake lingers. It has changed more than you know." Aaron felt his chest tighten. "If I could take it back, I would." Her golden eyes softened just slightly. "Do not. No Valari has ever dared speak to me so freely. You may call it foolish. I call it honest." The silence stretched between them. Aaron did not know what to say. At last, Nira turned back to the stars. "The enemy gathers," she said. "Battle will test us soon. Watch closely, human. Learn why the Valari endure." Aaron nodded, though his heart was uneasy. For in that moment he realized something strange. Nira's constant stares were no longer only about curiosity. There was something more in them. Respect, perhaps, or a search for something she had never found among her own people. And though he tried to deny it, Aaron found himself watching her too. The Valari fleet moved into the border regions with silent precision. Their ships were vast and strong, each one built like a floating fortress. Discipline guided every soldier, every officer, every movement. For them, war was not chaos but order. Each part of the fleet was a piece of a grand machine, and Princess General Nira stood at its heart. Aaron, however, felt no calm. He stood on the flagship's command deck, his hands damp with sweat as the stars shifted on the giant screens. The rival faction, known simply as the Keth, was drawing near. They were not as disciplined as the Valari, but they were aggressive and cunning. Reports said their fleet struck suddenly, using ambush and confusion to overwhelm their enemies. The Valari officers prepared with perfect focus, their voices sharp and direct. Yet Aaron felt out of place among them. He was only an engineer, not a strategist. His place should have been in the lower decks, making sure the engines ran. Instead, he found himself standing in the war room beside Nira, her golden eyes never leaving him. The enemy struck faster than anyone expected. Without warning, alarms filled the air. Keth ships appeared out of folded space, dropping from hidden positions among asteroids. Blazing energy fire filled the dark void. Valari shields lit up as they blocked the first strikes. Soldiers rushed to their posts, officers shouted orders, and the fleet shifted into tight formation. Aaron's chest pounded as he held onto the table's edge. He had never been in the middle of battle before. The screens showed explosions, flashing beams of light, and massive ships shaking under fire. He wanted to run, to hide, but he could not. Nira stood tall and calm, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Form the shield wall. Hold position. Do not break rank," she commanded. The Valari ships moved as one, forming a protective arc. Their disciplined nature shone brightly as they blocked the first waves of attack. Yet the Keth did not fight fairly. They broke into scattered formations, striking from odd angles, targeting weak spots. One of the Valari ships at the far side of the formation shuddered. Its power grid flickered, its shields failing. Aaron's eyes widened as he saw the error. Their systems had been overloaded, and the backup connections were not fast enough to recover. He spoke before he could stop himself. "You need to reroute the secondary power into the tertiary systems. Their design cannot handle the overload directly, but if you loop the energy through the stabilizers, it will hold." The Valari officers turned toward him in shock. A human engineer shouting in the war room, yet Nira raised her hand. "Do it," she ordered. The officer at the console hesitated, then followed Aaron's suggestion. Energy streams shifted across the screen. The ship's system steadied, its shields glowing back to life just before another blast struck. The officers glanced at each other, murmuring in surprise. Aaron stood frozen, his heart hammering. He had spoken without thinking, afraid he had overstepped. But when he turned, Nira was staring at him again, her gaze sharp yet approving. The battle raged on. The Keth attacked with speed, trying to break through the Valari formation, but every strike was met with precision. Still, the enemy found ways to exploit gaps. Their smaller ships darted close, striking supply vessels and vulnerable transports. "Human," Nira said suddenly, her voice carrying across the war room. "You see things we do not. Where will they strike next?" Aaron stammered. I'm not a strategist. You think differently. That is why you are here," Nira replied firmly. He looked at the glowing map of ships. The Valari fleet held strong, but the Keth moved like predators circling prey. Their pattern reminded him of storms he had once studied back on Earth, spirals that pushed and pulled, seeking weakness. He pointed to a sector near the edge of the formation. "There," he said. "They will break there. They will strike at the fuel ships." The officers frowned. Their sensors showed no sign of movement there. Yet moments later, enemy ships appeared just as Aaron predicted, bursting out of folded space and charging toward the fuel carriers. The Valari were ready this time. Their defenses shifted, weapons blazing, and the enemy attack was broken. A murmur spread through the war room. Some officers now looked at Aaron not with doubt, but with respect. The battle dragged on for hours. The Keth kept attacking in waves, but each time Aaron's quick thinking and Nira's commanding presence turned the tide. He noticed small details the Valari overlooked, little signs in the enemy's movement that revealed their intent. Nira trusted him without hesitation, giving orders based on his words. At one point, when the enemy tried to split the formation, Aaron realized the Valari response would be too slow. He rushed to the console, his fingers flying as he suggested a human method. Let one ship pretend to fall out of line, drawing the enemy in, then strike from both sides. The Valari officers gasped at the idea. Breaking formation was against their principles. Yet Nira's voice was clear. Follow him, the plan worked. The Keth ships surged forward to attack what they thought was weakness, only to be trapped and destroyed. The fleet roared with victory, their discipline combined with human improvisation. Through it all, Nira remained at Aaron's side. When enemy fire shook the flagship, she did not move. But when a blast nearly breached the deck, she stepped closer to him, shielding him with her own body. Aaron stared at her in shock, realizing she had risked herself for him. For a Valari leader of her rank, that was unthinkable. By the time the enemy finally retreated, the Valari fleet stood victorious. Ships drifted, damaged but alive, their shields glowing faintly. The war room erupted in cheers, officers saluting their princess general. Yet even in victory, Nira's gaze returned to Aaron. He stood breathless, exhausted, his body trembling from the strain. He could not believe he had played such a role in a real battle. Around him, the officers whispered in awe. The human had saved them. The human had guided their princess general. Later, as the fleet repaired and the officers dispersed, Nira approached Aaron in the quiet of the war room. "You think like no Valari," she said softly. "In your eyes, I see a world different from ours." Aaron swallowed hard. "I was only trying to help. Anyone could have seen those things." "No," she said firmly. "Only you. You bend where we stand firm. You find paths we do not see. That is why I watch you." Her words sank deep into him. The stares that had once filled him with fear now carried meaning. They were not only curiosity, they were admiration. Aaron did not know how to respond. He only bowed his head, feeling both humbled and overwhelmed. As Nira turned to leave, she glanced back at him once more. Her golden eyes lingered, steady and unblinking, and Aaron realized that the battle had changed more than just the war. It had changed the way the Valari saw humans, the way Nira saw him, and perhaps the way he saw himself. The battle had ended, but its weight still lingered across the Valari fleet. Ships floated together in formation, scarred but victorious. Crews moved with quiet determination, repairing damage, tending to the wounded, and restoring order. Victory was theirs, yet it was not only Valari discipline that had brought them through. A human voice had guided them at key moments, and that truth spread silently through the fleet. Aaron felt the change every day. Where once soldiers looked at him with suspicion or curiosity, now their eyes carried something different. Respect. Some even nodded to him as he passed, a gesture small yet powerful among the proud Valari. He had never asked for it, never wanted to be seen as more than a simple engineer. But his role in the battle could not be forgotten. Still, the weight of Nira's gaze had not lessened. If anything, it had grown heavier. She called on him more often now. In meetings, her voice would cut through the room to ask for his opinion. In technical discussions, she would request his insight before her senior engineers spoke. At meals, she would sit closer, her golden eyes never leaving him for long. The stares that once unsettled him now carried something else, expectation. Aaron did not know what to make of it. He respected her, even admired her, but she was a figure far beyond him. She was Princess General of the Valari, commander of fleets, heir to an empire. He was a human engineer, a man who had stumbled into attention by accident, yet somehow their paths kept crossing, as though fate itself pushed them together. One day, after long hours of repair work, Aaron was summoned to Nira's private chamber. Few ever saw it. The Valari whispered that it was a place of strategy and solitude, where she allowed no distraction. When he entered, he found her standing before a great window, the stars stretching endless beyond. She did not wear her full armor here, only lighter garb that revealed the strong lines of her form, yet her presence was still commanding, like a flame that burned too bright to ignore. "You came," she said, her voice calm but carrying weight. "You asked for me," Aaron replied softly. She turned, her eyes fixed on him. "The officers do not understand. They see you as strange, unpredictable. They do not see what I see." Aaron's breath caught. "And what do you see?" "A bridge," she answered. "Between your kind and mine. Between order and chaos, between strength and flexibility. You are fragile, yet you stand in the center of storms. I would understand why." Aaron felt her words settle over him like a cloak too heavy for his shoulders. "Humans are not special," he said slowly. "We only survive because we adapt. We are weak compared to you, but we refuse to give up. Even when the world says no, we keep trying. That is all." Her stare softened slightly. "That is not nothing. That is power of another kind." The silence stretched between them. Aaron felt her gaze press into him, searching deeper than words. It was not the cold stare of a commander now, but something warmer, though still unreadable. He shifted uneasily, unsure what she wanted from him. Before he could speak again, a voice called from the door. One of her senior officers entered, bowing low. "Princess General, forgive the interruption. There are those who question your choices. They say the human clouds your judgment." Aaron's chest tightened. He lowered his head, expecting to be dismissed, perhaps even sent away. Yet Nira did not waver. "Let them question," she said firmly. "I command this fleet. My judgment is mine alone. If they fear what a human brings, it is because they do not yet understand his value." The officer hesitated but did not argue. With a bow, he withdrew. The door closed, leaving the two of them alone once more. Aaron turned toward her, his voice low. "You defend me when you should not. I'm not worth the doubt they give you." Her eyes locked onto his. "You are worth more than you believe. You saved lives in battle. You brought victory where none was certain. That is not weakness. That is strength." He wanted to argue, but her voice left no room. The force of her words was not only command but conviction. For the first time, Aaron realized she truly believed in him. The days that followed drew them closer still. They walked the observation deck together, speaking not only of war but of their worlds. Aaron told her of Earth, its oceans, its forests, its cities, its storms. Nira listened with rare stillness, as though she painted the pictures in her mind. In turn, she told him of Valari traditions, of honor and discipline, of the burden of leadership she had carried since youth. At times, she stared at him with quiet intensity, her eyes filled with questions she did not voice. Aaron felt it, the weight of meaning in her silence. Yet he could not bring himself to ask what it was she truly saw in him. Whispers of challenge grew louder among the officers. Some claimed that the human had too much influence. Others said Nira was being distracted from her true duty. The tension reached its peak during a council meeting. A rival commander rose, his voice sharp. "Princess General, your judgment falters. You listen to a human above your own blood. We are Valari. We need no guidance from weaker worlds." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Nira. Aaron felt his chest tighten. He expected her to dismiss him, to protect her standing by cutting ties. Yet she stood, tall and fierce, her voice ringing through the chamber. "You call humanity weak. Yet when the Keth struck, it was human thought that saved our ships. You see fragility, but I see endurance. You see mistake, but I see possibility. This human has given us more than you are willing to admit, and I will not cast aside strength because you do not understand it." The chamber shook with her words. The rival commander fell silent, his face hard but his mouth closed. None dared oppose her further. Aaron stood frozen, his heart pounding. She had not only defended him, she had declared him part of her strength. Later, when the meeting ended and the hall emptied, Aaron walked beside her in silence. At last he said quietly, You risk much for me. Her eyes met his unwavering. I risk nothing. I choose. And in that moment he understood. Her constant stares were not only curiosity. They were not only admiration. They were trust. Perhaps even more. That night, as he lay in his quarters, Aaron thought of how far he had come. A nervous human engineer making a foolish mistake on his first day. A man who had once wished only to disappear from notice. Now he had become a bridge between worlds, standing at the side of a leader whose gaze never wavered. And though he still felt unworthy, he could not deny what he saw in her eyes. It was the beginning of something greater than either of them had expected. The war with the Keth had ended, but the echoes of the conflict remained. The Volari fleet, scarred but unbroken, sailed back toward the central worlds of the Empire. Victory songs filled the air of the ships, and banners of honor were hung across the decks. For the Volari, it was more than survival. It was proof that their discipline still carried strength. Yet whispers followed the victory too. Those whispers spoke not only of their Princess General's brilliance, but of the human who had stood at her side. Aaron felt those whispers wherever he went. Soldiers nodded at him with respect. Engineers gave him room to work, and officers who once ignored him now listened when he spoke. It was strange, heavy, and at times uncomfortable. He had not sought such a place among them, but he could not deny it was real. Through it all, Nira's eyes never left him. Her gaze had changed since the first awkward compliment. It was not curiosity alone, nor was it the sharp study of a commander judging a soldier. It was steady, warm, and filled with meaning he dared not name. He often wondered what she truly saw in him, but he no longer feared her stares. They had become part of him, like the stars above the fleet, always present, always shining. The journey back to the Volari capital was long, but it gave Aaron time to see more of Nira. Away from the heat of battle, he noticed her in quieter moments. She would stand on the observation deck watching the stars in silence. She would train with her soldiers, her movements flawless, her commands sharp yet patient. She would walk the halls with strength in every step, and still, when their paths crossed, her eyes would find him. One evening, as the fleet neared the capital, Nira summoned him again to her chamber. He entered, nervous as always, but she greeted him with a calm voice. "The council will gather when we arrive," she said. "They will honor our victory, but some will still question it. They will see you as a weakness or as a disruption to our order. I will not allow their doubts to grow." Aaron lowered his head. "If my presence causes you trouble, I will step aside." "No," Nira replied firmly. "You will stand with me. You will show them that humanity is not to be dismissed. You are part of this victory as much as I am." Her words left him speechless. He had never thought himself equal to her in anything. Yet she spoke as though it were fact. The day of the ceremony came. The Volari capital world was a shining jewel, its towers rising high above the surface, its skies filled with ships. The fleet entered the grand harbor, banners waving, trumpets sounding across the vast halls. Citizens filled the streets, saluting as the soldiers marched. Inside the great hall of the Empire, the council awaited. Elder leaders sat in long rows, their robes heavy with symbols of power. The air was thick with formality, yet also with tension, for behind the victory stood questions that had not been answered. Nira entered first, her armor polished, her head held high. The hall fell silent at her presence. She walked with calm authority, her golden eyes burning with command. At her side walked Aaron, dressed in simple human clothing, though his steps were uncertain. Murmurs filled the chamber as the council members saw him. The head of the council rose. "Princess General Nira, you return with victory. The Empire honors you. Yet we hear strange reports. A human stood by your side in battle. A human gave orders in our war room. We must ask why." The hall grew silent again. All eyes turned to her. Nira's voice was steady as stone. "Because his words saved lives. Because his insight brought us victory. Because he showed us strength we do not have." The council shifted uneasily. One elder frowned. "Strength? He is human. They are fragile, short-lived, scattered. What can their weakness give to us?" Nira's eyes sharpened. "They call it weakness. I call it endurance. When others fall, they rise. When order fails, they adapt. They see paths we do not. This human stood in the storm of battle and did not fall. His mind guided us when our traditions could not. I will not call that weakness. I will call it what it is, strength of another kind." The hall buzzed with whispers. Some nodded, others looked doubtful, but none dared oppose her openly. The head of the council lowered his gaze. If this is your judgment, Princess General, we will not deny it. The Empire recognizes humanity as an ally. Applause spread across the hall, first from the Valari soldiers who had fought in the battle, then from the citizens, then even from the elders. The sound rose high, filling the chamber with a weight Aaron could hardly bear. He stood frozen, unsure how to respond, until Nira placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. "Stand proud," she said softly, so only he could hear. "You have earned this." For the first time, Aaron lifted his head fully, not with fear but with quiet strength. The ceremony lasted long into the day. Songs were sung, honors were given, and banners were raised to mark the alliance between the Valari Empire and humanity. Aaron stood at Nira's side through it all, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed. He was not a mistake, not a shadow. He was part of history now. That night after the ceremony, Aaron found himself once more on the observation deck. The stars stretched endless before him, just as they had when this journey began. He thought of the path he had taken, the nervous engineer who had once stumbled through a foolish mistake, who had once wished to vanish from sight. And now here he was, standing between worlds changed forever. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned, and there she was. Nira stepped forward, her presence strong but her eyes softer than ever. "You did well today," she said. Aaron smiled faintly. "I only stood where you told me to stand." Her eyes held his. "No, you stood where you belonged." The silence stretched, filled not with unease but with something deeper. Aaron felt the weight of her stare, yet he no longer wished to look away. He met her eyes fully, steady and unafraid. For a long moment neither spoke. The stars burned bright around them, witnesses to a bond that had grown from accident to respect, from respect to trust, and from trust to something more. At last, Nira said softly, "When you called me cute, you spoke without fear. That honesty has never left you. Perhaps that is why I cannot look away." Aaron's heart pounded, but he only answered quietly, "And perhaps that is why I do not want you to." The stars shone on them both, a human and an alien Princess General, standing together at the edge of two worlds. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk, and as always, her eyes never left him.